that was amazing. That's a really good texture of Korea. Like I've seen a lot of kind of international talks, but I've not caught the Korea one for a while, and that was really fascinating. What I found kind of especially fascinating. I wanted to see if it's a common thing. Is this whole idea of kind of enduring games and the kind of all being about the result and the actual gameplay, not unimportant, but the victory being the pinnacle thing. So how can I get my characters maxed up? How can I win all the trophies? So you've seen that's clearly a very strong driver in Korea. Is the Japanese kind of market, is that reflected as well?
Hello. Not so much in Japan. I think PvP is not. It's more about collaborative. So if you look at Monster Strike does have it, but they really pushed on the collaborative side, and I think there's generally less of an aggressive or competitive nature in Japan. So I think that's distinctive to Korea. I think Japanese use a bit more kind of like it's timid and
Chinese
nice.
Or
I'd say definitely China.
Koreans.
Josh, sorry, I didn't introduce Josh. That's very bad of me. Josh, you were speaking earlier, so not everybody. Josh, would you like to quickly introduce yourself? Because
so my name is Josh. I work on my own with larger, usually around Asia, mostly with larger Western developers interested in penetrating markets in Asia as well as some other international markets. So helping them with the strategy as well as actually executing partnerships. So I mean, I think the competitive aspect for Chinese market is definitely quite strong as well. You have the expectation if you spend money that you have an advantage, and that's kind of the nature of it. And sort of having this infinitely sort of scalable competitive aspect is where you drive a lot of the monetization, where people spend, there's never any cap, and you get basically people who continue to spend more and more to continue to maintain the position in the leaderboard.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, obviously that I understand the basic principle of that, but it's interesting what you're saying about they just get the game and drop the dollars before they've even played it. That's kind of like that's a game developer's dream. No wonder you're so happy in Korea. I can't believe you encourage people to go there. That's amazing. I want to kind of riff on that a little bit. We had a kind of session before about kind of esports and the potential of that. So I'd like to come back to it and get because it was quite a Western perspective on esports really. So it would be interesting to get a perspective from all the Asian markets. Like, it feels to me like esports is going to be a big mobile esports. It feels like in the West it's going to be a big thing. I'm presuming in kind of Korea and Japan and China it already is a big thing. Is that fair to say? Or not? No, or not?
Not yet. Yeah, but I think it's definitely coming. Yeah, because
but because already esports generally is. I mean, Korea was the home of esports, really, wasn't it?
All the top players are from Korea. So it definitely has to come.
I mean, I think especially for mobile games, generally the most complex mobile games in terms of the experience and the requirement of skill are generally from Asia, especially like Korea. So I think inherently that aligns with kind of esports, like Clash Royale maybe deviates from that, but something like Vainglory is more like a traditional game experience in terms of like Twitch mechanics and skill. So I think that's why you potentially see the dominance.
It's just interesting for more thinking about if you're a publisher developer now, if you're thinking about how you can kind of differentiate esports. Obviously, it's a part of the appeal is a way of getting users to be acquired easier because they want to compete with their friends, and also to spend more money to scale up and to be more competitive. So if it can also be a great way to enter the kind of Asian markets by having a esports applicable game, then maybe that's a great strategy.
I think it's a point that kind of made before that Asia isn't a place.
Oh, it's like Europe is a place.
Bless you. Exactly. It's not anymore. It's one less of a place anyway, Europe. So I think that the motivations of players are different in each of the three territories that we're supposedly representing. I think to look for a one size fits all solution, whether it's esports or whatever, is probably pretty hard.
No, okay.
I mean, I think the interesting thing is that if you think of especially Chinese games, like traditionally they're very pay to win, which is not necessarily aligned with like the esports experience, right? Which is based on skill. So if you want to maximize revenue from that perspective, like you actually don't want to have the skill element, right? It's more around the pay to win. So it's interesting, like the top esports games to date are mostly from the West because they don't necessarily have that sort of focus. So those things are kind of at odds with each other. But I think the most skilled gamers potentially are from these markets.
But I think as a Western developer, I think that's a good angle to target the Asian because like I don't think the Western people can really compete on creating more content than the Chinese can. So I think if a user-generated content form is built into the game, like Clash of Clans, you're basically playing a different map all the time, created by users, or like Minecraft, So if a user-generated aspect is built into the game, I think it could be more. The chances of it being more successful in Asia gets higher, is what I feel.
And I take the point. Asia's not one point. I guess I'm addressing you all in one. Talking about that, the advantage for Western game developers, we know it's very, very hard everywhere. It's very competitive. The whole ocean's red, apparently. So, what is it? What else can the kind of Western developer kind of play towards? What is it that appeals in like Japan? You talked about the dick jokes, very popular, but maybe I misunderstood the talk.
Don't project.
Okay.
Interesting.
I think, certainly for us, something on our side, and speaking to the kind of indie guys that we speak to, I think going in to try and create another Puzzle and Dragons or Monster Strike is just foolhardy. It's just you don't go do that. I think it is, what's your differentiating thing? And there's already a natural differentiating thing. You're from a different culture, and as long as you can bring that and make it accessible, which I think was the point about the Kitty Powers dating game. The game itself was pretty different, but it was just inaccessible from an art point of view. As long as you can remove those barriers to accessibility, I think, then yes, use your differentiating factors. Because it is, Asian developers, Chinese, Korean, Japanese. No, it's just they're making different things. They're focused on different things, and I think that's why, the Western developers shouldn't try to copy that. They should try and find and be true to what's different to them.
So you shouldn't. You basically make the game that you want to make that reflects your culture, and then hopefully that by being different is what's going to be your power. Basically, not trying to.
I think so. For us, certainly for us, I think.
So you're kind of saying don't design for Japan, don't design for Korea.
I think a mistake people make is that these people go in like, I'm going to make a global game, and they try to make a game that will appeal to the West and Asia, and they end up making a game that appeals poorly to both. If you look at the exceptions to the rule, the Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, these experiences, like, maybe the guy that made it is like, oh, I meant to do this, but I think the reality is they made something like that was compelling, that like if you'd shown it to a company in Korea or China, they'd probably say, this will never work, because these are the things that work, this will never work. So I think the reality is I would focus on creating what you want to create, and if it does resonate globally, like, awesome. But I think you need to focus on the West first, have success there, and then potentially look at like going to Asia, because I think if you try to do that sort of like. But I think the reality is too, like, what you guys are doing with publishing in Japan is, I think there's this trend to, the local companies in the market are only building the games that work, like RPG, or if it's Korea. And so I think there's an opportunity to do something different, because I think there's been some things that have worked in the market from the West, and they're never going to be the top 10 or top 20 grossing. But doing something interesting and different, a lot of the companies in market are very sort of focused on the same thing.
I also want to point out that everybody wants to do that overnight. I think maybe because you've seen so many companies doing that overnight, but like I lived in the U.S. for now 10 years, and it's not an overnight thing, and I think it takes time, and I think it's a cultural product that you're selling. It's just like food, and you can't go to Japan and then try to make a better sushi than them. So you have to make burgers and then sell craft burgers, or you have to make IPAs and then sell it into Japan. I don't think trying to do what the Japanese are doing is the best way to approach the market.
No, I agree with that. That said, however, it feels to me, having been in this industry for a few years, it doesn't show obviously, but I'm very young, but it feels to me that Korea especially was, and Japan and and now China are ahead of the game. It feels like the Asian markets are further developed in a lot of ways than the Western market, certainly in sophistication of monetization and the live events and all that. It feels to me there's a lot more going, not that we're necessarily behind, but the trends seem to be forming there at the moment. Maybe, is that fair to say, or am I giving you too much credit?
I mean, the single most successful developer is Finnish.
Well,
right? So
Chinese owned.
yeah, sure, okay, sure, but
It was previously Japanese owned, but yeah.
So I don't necessarily think that's true.
fine.
And I think a lot of the Asian developers and publishers are having trouble coming back this way. It's I don't know, it's strange if you go back to console era, Japanese games, whether it's Mario, Zelda, Final Fantasy, they had no problems getting over to the West, and they were some of the best games around. Now the cultural barriers seem a lot stronger for some reason, and so you don't see even whether it is Puzzles and Dragons, I think they recently said they hit a milestone, but it's taken them a while for that to really get any traction in the US.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah, and I think that relates again. Creating a global game is very difficult. These games make so much money in these markets that they're actually the top games globally, but it's only from Japan or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's like Puzzles and Dragons.
So, I think in terms of maturity, I think in the depth and complexity, just generically, yes, I think the games, especially in Korea and Japan, well, especially Korea, much more advanced in terms of the systems and complexity, even casual games. But I think it depends just how you're looking at that question.
I remember back when we were starting all the conceptual stuff, like Skipping Stone and stuff. It was all seemed to be already further ahead, and then Japan with the feature phones who were further ahead of the monetization, like GRI and DNA were making so much money when everybody else was going, how the hell do we make money? It just feels like, but maybe it's happening all the way around. So I want to ask a question kind of sort of related to that, but so I was talking to a friend from Flare Games recently. They basically launched themselves in the Chinese App Store. They hadn't used a partner agency yet. Maybe they will. But they were amazed by the fact that they were just outside the top 100, but the level of downloads they had was just phenomenal. It's just, so they would have put them in the top 5 or 10 in the US. So I was kind of going to ask a little bit about what success looks like. What can you expect a little bit? If you're going to be in the top 10 or top 20, roughly what are you looking at in terms of downloads or revenue? That's quite a hard question. You've not
for each market.
For each country, yeah. Not all of them will be different. I don't know. But they were literally saying that the amount of downloads in China that they got, and they were saying outside the top 100 would have put them top 10 in the US and sort of top 5 in kind of Europe, just like that. Is that fair? Would you recognise that?
For us, China's our biggest market.
Yeah.
So, and
whether you mean to be or not.
Sorry? Yeah, exactly.
Whether you intended, find your game.
In all honesty, I think we, in Japan, we're very strong on especially the PR side, and we because we're, I guess, DNA-wise, we're a Japanese company.
Yeah.
Whereas China, we do what we need to do in terms of obviously localization and speaking to the relevant Apple and Google guys, but we can't. We haven't done as much, but it is by far our biggest market, and I think it is just the sheer volume of it, and it's strange. It's not strange. I mean, it's 1.5 billion people. So.
No, well, it's not strange. But you were saying in your talk, Shin, you were talking about how you shouldn't be expecting to be challenge Puzzles and Dragons. If you're happy with the top 100, top 50, there's a business there. Is that, that is often argued against when people talk about the kind of Western store. If you're not in the top 50, then
well, especially because again, this is one country. So I think if you're a Western developer, you're in the West making money. If you can be in the top, 100 or 200 in Japan, that incremental revenue is going to be pretty substantial. I think in terms of downloads, it's probably much lower because again, Korea, Japan are much smaller markets, but the revenue per download is going to be insane, just aggregated. And I don't know if it's true, but my assumption is the revenue is even more skewed towards the top games in these markets.
Yeah. So in Korea, I think you can make $1 million a day if you're a top game, and even if you look at Netmarble, which doesn't have a lot of global presence, their revenue last year was $1 billion, more than $1 billion. So yeah, because they dominate the Korean charts, and so yes, I think. Yeah, and China is also a very big market for us, and I think it really depends on what your strategy is. If you're really aiming for the top, you might need to work with a partner. But if you're just happy with a top 100 game, I think you might end up getting a bigger portion because you're getting all of it rather than splitting with your partner. So.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to EA or Microsoft and you're talking to them about an Asia strategy, you're obviously going to have. They're not going to be happy unless they're in there.
Yeah.
If you're speaking about a 5, 10, 15-person indie team who's predominantly making a game for the Western market, and they're seeing what else they can do for Asia. My advice is always do a few things, and it's incremental.
Yeah.
But the lazy option is just to press the button that says Japan, China, Korea, tick, release in English. And but if you spend a little bit of time, a little bit of money, you can actually reap some rewards from that. So,
Okay. I was going to ask about whether it is possible to publish in those markets. Obviously, in the App Store, you can just click the button. But is that really going to deliver anything? I mean, is that...
I mean, so yes, greater than zero. But I think so. I mean, this is the thing that you can infinitely debate. But basically, if I build a game and I most likely have minimal interest from publishers in these markets, obviously doing that versus nothing is going to be greater opportunity. So I think with high quality localization, some of the App Store, localizing the App Store materials. Look, that gives you a decent chance to very efficiently reach these audiences in some capacity. I think the reality is the marketing and promotion and partnerships are going to be out of reach for 95% of developers. So execute on something, and that's that can get you a decent amount of additional revenue. And again, if you think about the perspective of if you do a full culturalization of your game, that's going to be incredibly expensive. And you might never see the ROI on that. And I think that's what everyone always talks about China, you have to do really in-depth culturalization, which is, you do if you really want a chance at massive scale. But the reality is for most games, the cost and time in that, you may never recoup that.
Just splitting the builds itself is so expensive, that's why we always choose speed over that, because you're also there's a lot of opportunity cost involved with it. You don't want to build a second team that's as big as your first team. That you could have been working on your second game.
I mean, go on.
I was just say, Chinese Android, you have a different SDK for every different binary for every channel. So, and you got to update, every time you update. So it's an incredible amount of work.
Yeah. And also on the Apple and Google side, when they feature global. A lot of times they feature globally too. So.
Yeah. So just get a feature. That's the solution. Easy. I think Gamevil are in a really interesting position, and Commerce as well. I think we mentioned before about a lot of these big companies making just money in their own markets and struggling to hit the West. But I think you guys have a successful Western, well, to me it appears, I don't know your sort of P&L, but you have a successful kind of Western business. You've managed to transport that across. Is there any particular secret to doing that? It's persistence or?
I think it's persistence,
So,
if there's a secret, definitely don't tell us.
Is it you? Are you available?
I'm a terrible sprinter, but if you look at what type of games the Koreans are better at, it's all mental games, so long Go, the AlphaGo players, and also golf, and then archery, so we're all mental stuff. So
but as I say, so you're just saying you've been there long enough, you're putting the hours in, and that's been the kind of the differential.
I think so.
Okay. Fair enough. That's interesting. I want to talk about something a little bit topical. Nobody knows quite what's going to happen, but obviously there's a thing going on in China at the moment which might be relatively sizable. Do we think that these regulations, this government regulation, is going to cause sizable sort of ructions? Or is it for you guys? Is it not as much of an issue as it's being made?
No, it's obviously a big concern for us. I think right now, Android is hard. We've published a couple of games on Android via partners in the local markets, but everything else, it's a very hard market to reach. Right now, Apple is frictionless. It's as frictionless as anywhere else, and I think the worry I have is just how much friction will come in. But as one of the speakers was saying, apparently we'll find out tomorrow.
Yeah, well, it's exciting, interesting times. When you live in interesting times, been a
Chinese proverb.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of speculation. Some of the things I hear could be incredibly problematic, and some people are like business as usual. I think with Apple, at least hopefully with Apple, the workflow will be the same. Maybe there'll be longer sort of timeline to getting improved, but it could be very problematic if you have to work with a partner and that kind of thing. It just minimizes sort of people's ability to execute on the market that is very significant these days.
Just in case anyone's not aware, I mean, I'm sure you are in this space, but yeah, apparently, the Chinese government will be requiring some sort of approval of. Is it all mobile games or all Android games? I don't know. It's all mobile games. So it's something that actually did exist in the PC market to some degree already, but it's new for mobile. They're going to be kind of policing them. So that process could A, take some time, and B, be expensive potentially. So
yeah, I mean, because it's interesting, if you look at like Korea market for like social casino, none of the stuff you're used to are in the stores. So in the iOS, there is no category. It doesn't exist. There's no social casino in Korea because every game needs to be like reviewed and have like a licensing number. And then the only ones in Google Play that are these local Korean products. So I mean, you look at that, that's like kind of like the extreme end of what potentially could happen. I mean, that would be quite problematic.
So in 2 weeks' time, the way we're talking about, we're a different number one global market. We're going for.
Well, everyone, they'll all be local companies. Only it's Chinese companies.
Yeah, I don't think Apple will lose any money.
No, they don't tend to, do they? They don't tend to lose money.
I am confident with, just to finish on that point, I guess I am confident, like China is a market where Google doesn't exist and Facebook doesn't exist. You don't have Twitter. And yet there is an Apple App Store. So, they have obviously worked with the government to some extent, just the fact that it's been opened, the fact that it's still there.
Yeah.
So I'm quietly confident, optimistic that there will be something. I think something there. Yeah.
There'll be a channel.
Certainly for Apple.
It'll be good for Apple, certainly. So we've talked about, obviously there's been presentations about Korea and Japan and China, and did you mention Southeast Asia? Did you talk about Southeast Asia at all?
No.
Okay. Fine. We can. Well, I was going to say that. So from what I understand, kind of Southeast Asia at the moment is one of those different regions. Obviously, again, it's not one country; it's multiple countries in there. But Vietnam and Indonesia, Malaysia, etc., are the fastest growing markets in the world, or some of them at the moment, in terms of.
I think collectively, yeah.
Yeah, and I think collectively, I saw a stat that if you put them together, then they would be like the fourth or fifth biggest market already, and they are going like pretty quick. So is that more of a blue ocean? Is Southeast Asia, or at least kind of like I don't know what?
I think it's more blue.
Purple.
But so the problem is that we didn't just discover that right now, right? So
you think other people noticed this?
Yes. So like the guys from Korea, the guys from China are all set up shop there, right? Because it's a next market to dominate, and
it's closer.
And
Damn it!
Like you said, it's growing incredibly fast, which is great. But I think, again, it's very fragmented. You have very different sort of complexities with like hardware specs, like network speeds, like languages, like purchasing power versus like Singapore versus Vietnam. So there's a lot of complexity. But the reality is you need to address the whole thing, I think, to make it meaningful. And I've actually heard some stories of some publishers focused on Southeast Asia that were PC client games and went to mobile and now are actually shifting back to PC because the revenue just in that market is not as significant as they expected it to be. But I think incrementally for, Gamevil come to us, like, yeah, definitely get up your operations there. You have games that will work because a lot of games from Asia and the West will work there without significant
I think
changes.
the interesting thing, obviously, is from a cultural perspective that there's a lot of English speaking, and it's probably a more
Chinese
split. Yeah, it's a more split kind of more accessible than it is perhaps to go to kind of China or
Taiwan is already such a big market that I would put that market on their own already.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about the rest of Southeast Asia, for us, like Thailand and Singapore are really big because also the other problem that exists in Southeast Asia is there's still a lot of third party. The payment isn't all fully resolved, and once Vietnam market is a huge gaming market, but still I think around 80% are on different alternative payments.
Yeah. So that means it's very hard to get the money out, or it's just that they don't have the money to spend. Or?
You need local payment provider.
Which is another link in the chain.
But I think Google's been working on that really aggressively. So Google and Apple.
I've heard people, some of the larger companies say that like 50% of their revenue comes from payment that's not from Google or Apple. Mm-hmm. And so basically what they do is in the game, it's like, hey, like click here to go to this mobile web, and then you basically have a login and you can top up your account with like third-party payment. So it's kind of a gray area, but I don't I think they're trying to improve it. And
so they're putting more and more direct carrier billing into it. So I think it's a matter of time. I think Southeast Asia is going to be a big market, and especially for Asian companies like us, I think we have a huge advantage because there's a lot of cultural similarities. But I think for the Western companies also, like Singapore or like Australia, they're also like very influenced by those companies, like Thailand too. Like I think they're much more Western friendly than Korea, China.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I mean, I've been out. Yeah, I remember when I went to Tokyo Game Show. It's a little anecdote, and. Tokyo Game Show, it's amazing, but also kind of terrifying place for if you don't speak Japanese. It's okay if you speak Japanese, but
I find it fine.
There was a lot of barring and confusion, and it was, but it's not necessarily very Western friendly. And then there was this haven of Southeast Asian pavilion, which it was all English all the time. It was much easier for us monolingual folk that we are. Barely. Thank you very much. That's the best burn of the day. Barely monolingual. It's been a tough week. Do we have any questions? I've got a couple more, but do you have any questions out in the audience? This is three very experienced guys who've been working in different markets for.
We know all the answers to every.
They have the answer to everything. These people will change your life.
If not, we'll just make it up.
Could you use their level? Oh, there's a question. Grab him before he goes.
Well, a quick question on the. Korean games with all the top 10 games being very select, there are 3D rendered environments and all the 3D characters. The game's build size must be very large. So how does that affect the game? So like I mean like
in the West, you mean?
Games,
so
in
the Western market?
Yeah, for Western market, it is better to be maybe less than 100 megabytes, right? So for some
better
games,
Wi-Fi is what you're saying.
yeah. So how does that play?
I think in Korea it doesn't really matter. I think we ask the same question to all of our offices, and a lot of them say it doesn't matter. But I think the Japanese market is highly against anything over 100 megabytes because there's so many people just living off of. The carrier network only is what I heard, and so most of the Korean companies do it that way. They do additional downloads over the air.
It's the same in China, isn't it?
But I think that thin client thing is going away more and more. You know, like I see so many top games like being over a gigabyte. And,
Yeah, so if we're talking in the Western market, I think it's definitely a large problem for the Korean developers coming to the Western market. So if you look at like some game like Blade, which is a top grossing game, that was a 1 gigabyte download. It was #1 grossing game in Korea. You know, and here when you do user acquisition, you're like targeting only Wi-Fi, and then you have to download again, and your CPI is like $30. So this is actually, I think, a huge issue for bringing the content over. You have, I think, the binary size as well as like just the network latency. You have these like 12 on 12 crazy Unreal Engine 4 games. So I mean, I don't even know necessarily how to answer your question. So I'd say like yes, it is a huge issue, but I think there is movement towards just larger downloads because I know for a fact like Apple hates when you have that like, hey, it's like 20 megabytes and then you sit for like 30 minutes and download like 1 gigabyte. Like you'll never get featured with that kind of experience. So I don't know. I think as network speeds improve and data becomes less of an issue, hopefully less of a problem. But yeah.
Cool.
I don't think I answered the question.
No, that's good. So, are you happy with that? Yeah, he's happy. It's good. We're happy with that. So final sum up then. I guess retreating back to your only market that you can represent, because we have to stereotype it. But what one sort of prevailing piece of advice? What's the most important advice you offer to a developer publisher wanting to approach sort of Japan, China, and Korea? One tip. One. I know you just did 10, but just pick one of them. It's not hard, is it?
Jeez, don't do dick jokes. That would be my advice.
You did it. I'm pretty
No, I think it's just, you know, like I think everyone on the panel said this, don't try and compete with what's out there, with the local developers, local publishers, because it's just too hard. Stay true to what you're creating yourself, and then just try and lower the barriers of accessibility for a user there. But if you try and morph whatever idea you've got into, I want to make this game specifically for China, but you don't live in China, you don't know much about China, don't do it.
Don't do that. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I mentioned this earlier on. My feedback would be, build the game you want to build that will be successful in the Western market, and either organically it will become successful in these markets, or you'll catch the interest of somebody that can help you. But otherwise, do the high quality localization. And use the self-publishing channels available to capture like some revenue in the market. I mean, that's going to be the strategy for 95% of games.
Good answer.
I would say travel a lot. Like there's a lot of developers who've never been to Korea, and then they have so much high ambitions for Korea. You at least have to go to your local Korean barbecue place and
you should go to G-Star. I mean, my tip, go to G-Star. It's the most successful of all the relationships.
Play the Korean games first. There's a lot of them that are released in the West, and so like you'll be indirectly influenced, and then you might come up with a global idea.
Cool. All right.
Sorry, I have to say one other thing because you reminded me. So I think the other thing to realize is that these guys are all coming here, right? So they are truly becoming global game companies, coming from Asia and China and Korea. So you need to start thinking globally and have a strategy, but it doesn't need to be incredibly complex. But I think our market becoming much more competitive because these guys' markets are truly red oceans, and even though our market is very difficult, it's still much easier.
Right, cool. Good answer. Thank you very much, guys. Can I have a round of applause, please, for the panel?